Have you ever tried to teach someone something and noticed that while they're in that learning stage, they have this tendency to try to jump ahead or even compensate for their weaknesses? Like when I was learning to play the guitar, my teacher had to keep correcting these little things that I was neglecting. Like I might start getting good at my scales, but then my rhythm playing would lag behind. Or I might learn how to play these really fast riffs with my left hand, but then my right hand would start not holding the pick properly to try and compensate for what I was trying to do. With any skill or knowledge, there's this completeness that is hard to keep in perspective. There's something in human nature, whether it be impatience or vanity or just laziness, that tempts us to settle for some lesser version of the whole thing. Like some lesser version of the skill, as long as it looks like we know what we're doing, or some lesser form of knowledge, as long as we still get our credentials at the end. All the great religious traditions have been this attempt to penetrate the mysteries of ultimate truth and ultimate reality and come up with some understanding of it that can then be taught to others. And just like other forms of knowledge, we've always had this tendency to settle for an incomplete picture about the things that we believe. But with religious truth, it gets even harder because of this dimension of mystery. Because the truth, the whole truth, is far bigger than we are. Whether or not God exists, one thing that is for sure is that there is a God-sized something behind all reality. Like the universe, they tell us, had a beginning, and whatever initiated it was some incredible power. And that power either has to be someone or something, but whatever it was God-sized, as in too big for our limited comprehension. And this is a problem for us because it means that we have to put up with the role of mystery in accessing this idea of truth. And this makes us feel small and humble and vulnerable, and for whatever reason, we really don't like that. G.K. Chesterton has this great quote about the difference between poets and logicians. He says the poet only asks to get his head inside the heavens, but the logician tries to get the heavens inside to his head, and it's his head that splits. Whatever our picture of ultimate truth is, it should be big and it should allow room for mystery. As soon as we realize that the heavens don't fit in our heads, though, we have this temptation to settle for an incomplete version that does fit in our heads. And this is what the Catholic Church has always tried to push back against, and admittedly, not without its own stumbles along the way. The word Catholic was first used by St. Ignatius of Antioch in the year 107 AD in a way that described the universality of the church as found in the ministry of its bishops. Now, he was portraying a church that was united as a whole rather than one isolated by its constituent parts. Fast forward a few centuries, and St. Augustine used the word to differentiate between heretical factions and the true church, because by then there had already been several attempts to try to reduce the scope of the Christian faith to cheaper rationalizations. You see, Catholicism describes itself as the fullness of the faith, but from the very beginning there were people who wanted a faith that they could rationalize, one that would fit within their limited capacity to reason, one that didn't accept the residency of mystery. And this is what all the major heresies attempt to do. So among the earliest heresies, there was Arianism, which couldn't make sense of how Jesus could be both divine and human, so they just went with human. And then there was Gnosticism, which was this sort of strange regression of Judaism and Christianity into a kind of quasi-pantheism, which is like the default human spirituality. Then there was Pelagianism, which couldn't make sense of God's grace as a necessary component of salvation. So they just went with this idea that you can save yourself through your own moral effort. So then fast forward 1,000 years or so, and we come to the Protestant Revolution, which was grounded in the sola doctrines, sola being Latin for alone. And the alone doctrines were these kinds of reductions where they said things like, we are saved by faith alone, or scripture alone is our authority. And this created a more simplistic and narrow view of the Christian faith. And with each new proposition, the Catholic Church's response was always to say, no, the truth is bigger than what you're offering here. You need to widen the scope of your lens to account for the need for mystery. Stop choosing a version of truth just because you can more easily manage it intellectually. So the definition of the word Catholic that I've always felt best represented this dynamic is according to the whole, because the church has always maintained and preserved the whole vista of truth, even when we wanted to narrow our gaze and focus on one small aspect of truth. So it's not something like faith alone, it's faith and love. It's not something like scripture alone, it's scripture and tradition. Catholic in this sense means not narrow-minded. It doesn't accept some counterfeit, small, compromised version of the truth just because it's more palatable. And this isn't just with religious doctrine. Whenever you hear two people arguing from polarized positions on the political spectrum, don't you just feel like they're missing the bigger picture? Because truth isn't some small point on a spectrum of ideas. It doesn't acquiesce to the fanaticism of false dichotomies. And this is what it means to be Catholic. You're someone who refuses to be narrow-minded and tempted away from the big picture. You're someone who refuses to be seduced by polarized ideologies. So when someone tells you that you should be a socialist because you believe in caring for the marginalized, you remember that confiscating other people's private property isn't the path to justice. When someone tells you that you should be Protestant because they have less rules, you remember that less doesn't necessarily mean more in this case. And when someone tells you that science is the only way to know what is true, you remember that there are dimensions of truth that exist outside our intellectual capacity. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed that, then please consider subscribing and liking, and come find me on Facebook and Twitter. It's a huge help when you do that. It helps us get these videos in front of more and more people. And a big thank you goes out to You Catholic for presenting these videos. And if you want to support the making of these videos, then please consider supporting my work as a digital media and marketing expert. My company, Holdsworth Design, specializes in branding, web and graphic design, marketing, social media, videography, and all that kind of good stuff. So if you know of a parish, a diocese, a ministry, or a business that needs help in those areas, then please send them our way, and I'm sure we can help them out.